I want to thank AEA publicly for what they're doing and bringing this together. And if you haven't considered joining our professional association, I urge you to consider doing so for all it does for our sappers and their families. And so, Dave, thanks. That's all I have. Look forward to the conversation tonight.
And so without any further ado, Colonel Dave Stalker from the 23rd Engineer Battalion will lead us through with his team on their experience at the CTC and terrain shaping.
Hey, thanks, Dave. Good evening, everyone, fellow engineer leaders. I appreciate everyone taking time this evening to steward the profession forward. The basis of this is going to be an engineer TED Talks. We're going to talk about the use of the SAVO, utility on terrain shaping, operations in a LSCO environment based on our experiences at NTC. We'll kind of keep it at a LSCO at large, but we'll also talk about our tacit experiences at NTC. You can see on the slide there, throughout history, engineers have been at the forefront of terrain shaping and munition emplacement to achieve a desired effect, whether it's in the Civil War, where we had pickets and pike fortifications along with landmine emplacement, World War I and II, where you saw trench line, hedgehog, and row minefields. You see in the 1990s with the implementation of the Volcano, which was fielded in 1988. I think the row minefield concept became faster and it became more a larger demand signal from the maneuver forces for emplacement of it. But you see national policy and global norms started to shift, especially with the service life extension program and the limitations it did place on row minefields. And we kind of, that got eliminated from our current landmine capability. And so a gap solution was created with the SAVO. And the SAVO is an interim solution. I don't think it's a long-term solution. And we're going to talk about that solution and how we used it and leveraged it in a combined arms fight at NTC. There's two questions to think about as we go through this brief. The first question is, has AEA development changed? And I'd solicit it really hasn't, based on my experience, especially with LSCO. It's still driven by BCT and task force maneuver commanders. There's still the golden picket aspect of it. It's still a combined arms interface, especially in the defense, just as combined arms breaching is on the offense. So I don't think that hasn't changed much. It's still iterative in nature when you look at the steps. It's going to be resource and OE operating environment dependent. And the churn of that actually, in my opinion, has gotten faster over time, especially for the pace of modern warfare. I think engineers still remain a critical member of this, both at the BCT level and the task force level. And I'd even argue there's not enough engineers at those levels to fully implement what our capabilities are in a LSCO, fast-paced LSCO fight. What has changed are formations and equipment is much different than it has in the past. And we see that especially in the Striker. We're in NTC where you have a vast open desert. You're not fighting a armored defensive fight. You're leveraging the mobility of the Striker platform. And therefore engagement area becomes a little bit different based on the formation. And the speed of combat and mission command has drastically changed what I would say maybe tipped us more to a mobile defense and area defense, especially given the capabilities and some of the vulnerabilities associated with the Striker. But the principles, I would argue, remain the same. The second question to ask is engagement area development still relevant in a LSCO fight? I would say yes, more than ever. Our experiences at NTC taught me that LSCO is more than ever an economy of force fight. There's too many problem sets and not enough company headquarters to solve those problems. We find ourselves reorganizing our engineer formations, our enabler formations, and even different makeshift task force to solve some of those problems. And engineers navigate doctrinal hierarchy extremely well. And I think that provides us with a unique opportunity to restore our ability to be combined arms in the defense, which is lacking in the Afghanistan, Iraq period of time where counterinsurgency and stability operations came to the forefront. So I think if we invest in some of the engagement area development opportunities, whether it's in training or whether it's in a LSCO environment at a CTC, we have the ability to store some of that combined arms fight that traditionally has been the defense. Now, when I'm going to turn it over to Major Brad Laux, he was my S3 during our rotation. What he's gonna do is flatten a playing field. It's not meant to insult anybody's intelligence, but we think understanding starts with good definitions. So he's going to talk about obstacle integration, some of the definitions, doctrinal definitions associated with them, and he's going to go over a quick SAVO doctrinal overview. And then we're going to turn it over to a company commander, a platoon leader, and some NCOs to talk about their lessons learned, with the focus of this being employment of the SAVO, how to train for the SAVO, and implementation, whether it's in war or in a CTC or warlike environment. Brad, floor is yours.
All right, sir. Appreciate the introduction. So the first thing I want to walk everyone through is the concept of achieving combined arms obstacle integration. And once we kind of regreen ourselves on what that all entails, I'll provide a couple of examples from our time at NTC, and hopefully that'll provoke a thought or two that you can incorporate in your home station training to get after your counterability and survivability mets. So when you look at the ATP, it really breaks combined arms obstacle integration down into three parts. The first part is obstacle design and integration that occurs during planning, which is really the art behind it. The second piece is your ability to resource that plan, which is the science. And then the third piece there is obstacle sighting. So that occurs on the ground as part of engagement area development. And that's really where that art meets the science, and where the combined arms piece comes into the obstacle integration. So it's that direct link between fires, the fire control measures, and the obstacle effects. So broadly going through each one of those, starting with design. So design is really that firm starting point that can be tailored based off the mission variables. And it really requires your planners, your leaders to understand three things. So the first is the target. So what's the type and size of the opposing force? What if that's mounted, is it dismounted? What type of breaching capabilities do they have? Because that's going to play into the depth of the obstacle that you're constructing. The second piece is understanding the effect that you want to achieve, your commander wants to achieve, whether that's disrupt, fix, block, or turn. And then the last piece is the terrain. So what is the relative location that you'd be looking at putting your obstacle group out at? What's the actual soil composition? Because that's going to play effect into your ability to put in certain earthen obstacles. And then moving on to obstacle resourcing. Really, that's your ability to do design effectively is going to play directly into that. And I think that's probably one of the most important and probably yet the most challenging aspects behind obstacle integration. So the ATP breaks it down into the 6 steps. I'm not going to go through that as part of this. Really, what the major takeaway is to be able to estimate the resource requirements, the manning, the equipment that you have on hand, and what you require for your obstacle effect, the time that you have available to put in effect is important to your overall operational success in the defense, and that's something that's going to have to occur well left of having to construct your hasty defense or your mobile defense, whatever you're constructing. Then finally going into obstacle sighting. That's where your guys, your company level leaders are out there on the ground with those maneuver task forces, and they're validating or adjusting that obstacle design, ensuring that it's tied into mobility corridors, that is overwatched and supports the fires plan, and really, again, where that combined arms aspects come in. So just moving into some of the bottom left there, and really what we learned while we were down at NTC. So the fact that to achieve this effectively, bottom-up refinement requires top-down planning. And I think if you study large-scale combat operations, or if you've been to a CTC before, you likely understand that you're going to have to start planning for the defense well ahead of hitting that point. So when we were down in NTC, I think it was 72 to 96 hours out is when we started parallel planning with the brigade. And one of the things that we did find is that the maneuver task forces were inundated in that close fight, and that next objective is the offense was continuing. They didn't have the staff capacity to necessarily focus on the defense at the time. I think that leads into the importance of early integration of your task force engineers, that they're master of the combined arms engagement area development craft, so that they have a seat at the table. So one of the things that we did is we used our company commanders, plugged into those task forces. We were feeding the design that we were planning with the brigade through them to ensure that it met that maneuver commander's effect for the engagement areas that they were being assigned, so we can ensure that the right resources were out there. The second piece there is counterability operations are resource intensive, and I think we kind of foot stomped that already. But the fact that you have to collaborate at all echelons early, because if you look at your maneuver formations, your engineers, your BSB that's out there, they likely don't have the assets to move all the class 4 and 5 barrier materials that you need to get them in place. You're probably gonna have to leverage somebody like a CSSB. And if you are doing that, even if your CCLs are built, you're looking at 48 hours to get those resources to the engineer supply points and employ them into your obstacle belts and groups. And then the last piece I'll make, the last sentence there, open and rolling terrain requires obstacle systems to cover large areas rapidly. And that really stems from a question our lieutenant planner asked as we were doing a Plan X in preparation for going out to NTC. And that was, how are we going to use wire and our limited dozer assets to be able to close off terrain and these 11-kilometer wide mobility corridors like you'd see in the central corridor of NTC. And really good question for an LT to ask and see. And I think with how we bridge that gap, and we'll transition to the next slide, and that was with the standoff activated volcano obstacle, which we really leveraged while we were down at NTC and played a huge part in our success in the defense. So if you're sitting in this lessons learned forum, whatever time it is at night, most of you are probably in your homes right now. You probably have heard of the standoff activated volcano obstacle, but you may not have had hands-on application with it in training or in a CTC. So just to go over it quickly, really the easiest way to look at it is a portable ground volcano system that really provides more flexibility to the maneuver commanders on the ground. I think that top left chart there really points towards the flexibility that it offers. So on the left-hand side of that chart, you can see you can put one SAVO base plate out with the 4 M87A1 canisters and close off an 80 by 80 meter gap, whether that's a pass through a mountain complex or just closing off a lane that you had after the CAF scouts came back through. And then on the right side, you can see you can still get after the doctrinal effect, whether it's turn, disrupt, block, fix. So a lot of flexibility for the maneuver commander. On the right top, you can see that you can employ it with 3 already fielded. You're probably familiar with most of them. Initiation systems. I think each come with their own benefit and challenges, which I won't necessarily go through now. I think it will come out to our company level leaders. And then on the bottom right, if you want to hit play, if you haven't seen it before, it's just a quick video of a single base plate with the 4 M87A1 canisters in it being launched. So a great system and a great addition to get after some of the gaps that Colonel Stalker talked about in the opening slide. With that, I'll transition over to Captain Matt Schultes. He was our Bravo company commander while we were at NTC.
Sir, thank you for the introduction. Again, I'm Matt Schultes. I was the BCO commander. My company was assigned to support 2-3 infantry in the northern corridor during the defense. So what I have, the first graphic on the top left, that's our breakdown of the MTO vehicles in my sapper platoon. The combat load and how we configured it going into NTC to provide us the most flexibility to achieve whatever missions were given to us and achieve the goal of a combined arms unit with 2-3 infantry. The first caveat here is I do acknowledge that the Spider was a capability that we could use to help initiate the SAVO system, but we deliberately chose not to just because of the complexity of establishing it. And with the comms-integrated environment that they had at NTC, we thought that we'd be assuming too much risk in a comms-integrated environment, having to go back to the point of the obstacle to then manually initiate anyway. So we have, organically, we have 4 engineer striker variants, each with a front-end attachment, and then 2 MICLICs for the 4 strikers. Each of those, we broke down a total of 20 SAVO plates, 2 in each ESV. Now we had 160 volcano canisters, placing 8 in each ESV as well. Each one carried their own marking material. The ones with MICLICs had their own CD450J blasting machine used to initiate the MICLIC, which is also able to be used to initiate the SAVO. And the other 2, we used our RAMS radio frequency and then the RAMS magneto induction. We also had an LHS. We have one MTO difference a lot of other units don't have is that our LHS carries our Volcano, and it can only carry half the capacity of a normal LHS cargo variant. So we can have 180 canisters of Volcano mounted at one time. And then we have an LHS trailer pulling a CCL Delta with 300 meters worth of wire that can in place a triple strand concertina wire obstacle. And then we had one cargo LMTV that carried the additional 12 SAVO base plates, 48 canisters, marking material, then all the squad specialty equipment that we couldn't fit in the ESVs. So that gave us the flexibility to in place point obstacles at the squad level, and that's what we were trying to get to support each of the maneuver companies in that task force. So going into the defense, the staff came up with an awesome MDMP session, and out of that came this obstacle sketch of the northern corridor, where we were tasked with emplacing a 1,500 meter turn from north to south toward the center, an 1,800 meter turn from the south to the north in the center, and the center obstacle being a 250 meter obstacle frontage, either Volcano or SAVO obstacle. And what this sketch turned into was the first lesson learned I want to bring up, is that the map recon does not reflect ground conditions for the terrain shaping. You can see in the graph on the bottom right hand side, the proposed obstacles compared to executed, our percentage complete is much higher in the ABD berm and in the frat fence, because we had to commit more blade hours and our already strained class 4 availability to make sure that our obstacles were anchored into terrain on the northern and southern wall of the northern corridor. And we were able to leverage SAVO and then our traditionally launched Volcano to mitigate the impacts of this shortage, and then the increased blade hour requirements to anchor both of those obstacles. So we found that SAVO was excellent for uneven terrain. The traditionally vehicle launched Volcano obstacles get pretty hazardous in some of the wadis and rolling, rapidly changing elevation terrain that NTC offers. And we were able to mitigate a lot of that risk by hand emplacing with the SAVO. And the last point I want to make is that it adds flexibility, SAVO does, but you have to combine everything. What we ended up doing was that total of 2,793 meters of frat fence for that central obstacle. And we used 3 plates of SAVO to achieve this fixed effect. And that final plate was locked in with the traditionally launched Volcano using that React formula we traditionally use for that deployment. And by using all of these assets available to us, that's how we were able to achieve that desired combined arms effect. And I'll pass it over to Lieutenant Johnson. He was one of the sapper PLs during this rotation. He can provide a unique perspective on that as well.
Thanks, sir. Good evening, everyone. First Lieutenant Cam Johnson. I was a sapper PL for 23rd BB during this NTC rotation. My platoon was selected to be team breach during an operation to seize Razish and then immediately establish a hasty defense in the Hidden Valley region located to the southwest. As the most forward element, we had to conduct the breach with speed and quickly close off Hidden Valley. The top graphic depicts the 2 holding areas used during the operation in relation to Hidden Valley and Razish. And the bottom graphic depicts the obstacle belt that my platoon was responsible for immediately following our breach through John Wayne Pass. The practicality of SAVO and ease of transportation allowed us to establish this hasty fighting position while the fight for Razish was still happening. So first I want to talk about selection of terrain. First piece to mention here is just the leveling of the base plates to that tolerance of plus or minus 15 degrees, something that proved to be difficult as the microterrain caused issues. There are wadis, minor changes in elevation, and rocky areas that we didn't really foresee that as we templated on the map. That kind of feeds into the next one of the microterrain proved to dictate way more of the obstacle location than just the overall map recon. Walking the terrain with a dagger and marking material to provide that accurate 8-digit coordinate of the minefield sped up the process for changing the requested site for a SAVO minefield. We needed approval from brigade with 8-digit grids to start in placing the obstacle. So the quicker we can provide that information, the quicker we were able to start in placing the obstacle. And then lastly, there were complementary obstacle emplacements that helped shape the defense and required less time and resources, but helped develop a stronger defense. So the first being the SAVO point obstacle concept, which Major Laux had mentioned, which utilizes those SAVO base plates without utilizing all 4 canisters to create that point obstacle on a road or even in a narrow corridor. Next was bluff minefields, which are just in placing a frat fence without any SAVO to deceive the enemy and slow them down. And then lastly are just javelin positions to strengthen those defense without heavily relying on our maneuver counterparts to provide those assets. Next is space management. So the transportability of the SAVO base plates allowed my platoon to be effective independently resourcing the materials necessary to establish this defense once the entire mission kicked off. We had to discuss how to properly load, the LHS, PLS, everything that Captain Schultz just walked through to conduct this breach and then immediately transition to establishing the safety defense. So it required deliberate thought process to the load plan, but also establishing these holding areas or staging areas during the mission. So we recognized that these holding areas required a terrain manager to own that space. In fact, our battalion CSM became the terrain manager as the entire brigade flowed through this narrow pass, because we need somebody with authority and with a little bit of rank to create those spaces for the maneuver units to posture themselves for the offensive operation, while simultaneously we as the engineers cross-loaded our equipment to reorganize our platoons as we postured again for this hasty defense. And then lastly, we recognized that we just need to be creative when it came to space management. One technique one of our gunners came up with was just using the spent Miklig tubs as SAVO base plate holders to transport rather than having these LMTV run them back and forth. And then lastly, you want to talk here about time horizons per task. So the SAVO emplacement is relatively easy task to perform with minimal manning, and it definitely can be installed with one squad. With an entire platoon, in placing one SAVO minefield and the frat fence proved to be a simple task, we could do it in an hour. However, so many external factors come into play when doing this in a contested environment during NTC versus when we were just doing this in an open field outside our company area at JBLM. The time to place the SAVO more than doubled for our platoon when we had to perform this during mission. And a lot of factors led into this time increase, but mainly the biggest factor was just doing it at night under NVGs. And so having that accurate time for day and night obstacle emplacement kind of proved in hindsight to be extremely beneficial for these commanders to make these decisions for engagement area development. In terms of lessons learned, the first is just train as you fight. I wish it would have been in our platoon way more to go out during the day and at night, or even during PT in MOP gear and IOTV, and then place a SAVO minefield and frat fence to standard with a stopwatch, so I can sit there and I can come to the maneuver commander with confidence to say, hey, we can build these obstacles in this amount of time period with 100% confidence. Next is just training on the basics. As engineers, we spent so much time leading up to NTC, just prepping ourselves on engineer specific tasks, such as breach lanes. When in reality, I wish we had spent more time on some of the basic tasks we needed, such as react to contact, move under fire, and battle drill 1 alpha, conduct SWAT attack. We did one large combined arms breach during contested operations, but had a handful of squad attacks or react to contacts during the rotation. And it was really evident that soldiers weren't as confident on these basic soldier tasks because, again, we had spent so much time becoming proficient in these engineering tasks. And then lastly is the breadth of qualified alternates. You don't know you need a jump gunner or a javelin qualified soldier until you need a jump gunner or a javelin qualified soldier. During mission, when soldiers were given casualty cards and we asked, E3s and E4s to go take over that javelin fighting position, it was met with almost a resounding, I'm not really sure how to use it. So in hindsight, I wish that I had required my javelin trained personnel to train the entire platoon to have that breadth of knowledge across, because it proved not to just be beneficial, but necessary. So this concludes my slide, and now I'll pass it off to Sergeant First Class Leak.
Hey team, this is Colonel Stalker. We're going to talk through our active duty and reserve component interoperability and integration during NTC. We broke it into 3 things: human dimension, procedural dimension, and the technical dimension. We had two reserve units and one active duty chem unit that were under our task force spearhead. One was a 450 Mac, and that's the one we're going to spend most of our time talking about because we had great success with that. Oftentimes, depending on how they're being sourced and how they come to you, it becomes terribly difficult for the integration. I will tell you, we built the team early. They're both their battalion, brigade, and their company headquarters. They tied in virtually over IPRs. We had a unique, and we started the commander dialogue, not only at battalion level, but at company level and platoon level. We started to integrate our platoons with their annual training. We did have the lucky circumstance where we were at a cadet summer training tasking over the summer, and they had their 2-week active duty training out there. So we had the ability where company commanders could meet other fellow company commanders and platoon leaders, and it led to a greater amount of flexibility for us when we looked at task org discussions. And this all came to bear when we went to LTP. They sent their full team out to LTP, and we had the ability to have a honest discussion about their capabilities, what they didn't have, what they needed, what training deficits they had, and how we could close those gaps or assist with it. But more importantly, it greatly affected our task organization. Our play card going into NTC is we tried to have homogeneous companies where we had a MAC platoon, a sapper platoon, and an ESC platoon across the board. And having faith and confidence in knowing the people and the platoon leader down to the platoon leader level by first name made a huge deal when we went to NTC, because the trust factor increased greatly. That being said, I'll turn it over where we can talk procedural and technical dimension.
My name is Staff Sergeant Madriz. I was one of the few NCOs on the ground that got attached to the reserve companies to train when we were doing the SAVO. Time and time again, a workable tax op has saved me from carrying binders and binders of reference material. With a workable tax op, individual soldier has a ready reference to understand how the unit operates and how the specific engineer tasks are to be accomplished with the 23rd BEB. Pictures work best for this when you're talking about the SAVO minefield. Bird's eye view is easy to understand by everyone, and that's pretty much what I used when I was taught 450th MAC class on the SAVO. 23rd BEB sent a 450th MAC a few tax ops over the summer when they were doing cadet training. So everyone had an understanding of what we were talking about. So when I gave my class, it just became, it was really flawless. And they were able to understand it a lot easier with picture references. When we were doing, so I've had two very different experiences working with the reserves and National Guard. My very first time working with them, I was working with the platoon and the PL and platoon sergeant. They're very uncooperative. They didn't really want us there. And it was just kind of, they're being very stubborn and they weren't being very receptive to our recommendations. However, I knew I was there to just give them advice and help them out when they wanted to. However, the last time I worked with National Guard and Reserves was with 450th at NTC. And when we were doing the SAVO, and when I first got integrated with them, one of their platoon sergeants came up to me and was like, hey, we haven't really done this before. Please teach us a class. I went ahead and did that. And then he really bought into the idea of having us there. And he's very grateful that we were there. It was me and a couple of NCOs, and we were there to help them out with this. Once I showed him how to do it, he was pretty confident in it. However, he had the minefield that we did is about a squad size. He had his whole platoon go out there and walk it with us. And we all walked it together just to get everyone like a baseline understanding of how it went. And it went really fast and it worked really well. So I think, that's the best kind of training to do, is just have a knowledgeable NCO on the ground, teaching that platoon or that company on how to do that task. And it works really well when everyone just buys in. I think that's the best method when we're going and teaching and integrating with the Reserve and National Guard. And with that, pass it over to Sergeant Leak.
Thank you, Sergeant Madriz. Sergeant Leak, I'll be going over the technical dimension. The biggest thing is ensure proper systems for security communications, and we accomplish that through right personnel, right equipment, and the right location. Right personnel, we have our NCOs well trained with the SMEs, the right equipment, whether it be JBCPs, which the Combo 2 and 3 usually don't have access to, as well as our Rams and Spiders, which talk to the SAVOs, and the right location. Integrated into, down in with the 450 MAG, so they can accomplish mission when it's set before them. We accomplish that through three things. One, baseline training for all components, where that's sending down the tax ops so they can train beforehand, putting our NCOs down there so you train going into the fight and helping them to accomplish their mission. Two, leader certification, making sure your leaders are certified and actually ready to teach that information in a proficient manner and embed that talent. Put those NCOs, those SMEs down there with that unit so they're training on the ground, making sure that unit's able to talk back to higher echelon so they know where to be. Then make sure you have system experts, especially with the JBCP. that, turn back over to you, sir.
So I want to touch just briefly on how we can train to achieve this combined arms effect. So the greatest thing I can recommend is the early integration with maneuver forces. And for the engineers, getting back at that table and selling our anti-tank and our terrain shaping capability to truly achieve that combined arms effect. So what I want to go over briefly is me in hindsight, what I wish I had done. So that calendar on the right-hand side, that's our calendar year 21 training progression from training week 15 all the way to training week 12. The arrows show opportunities that we had. Where looking back, we could have integrated SAVO and SLAM and a lot of the technical aspects of achieving that combined arms. Black is where we swung and missed. We didn't integrate it the way we should have. And the green ones are where we actually had the best opportunity to draw out the TADs, link in with maneuver forces or compo 2 and 3 forces to create that shared understanding of what our capability truly is. And then looking back, wishing that we had had a greater leader development program that focused more on creating leaders who are able to think outside the box and really think about how they can use their equipment and adjust doctrine to really achieve that effect as well. So overall, if I had to boil it down, I would build leader expertise at that EQT1 level first, integrate your SAVO and SLAM as much as you can in sergeant time training for EQT2. And then your 3 through 6, including it into your scenarios, and then reinforcing what they learned during 1 and 2 as well. And then getting out there and integrating early with the supported maneuver units. And if I had some recommendations for SAVO across the board, increasing the TADS availability and quality at home station and CTCs. The ones that we've seen have been made of laminated wood, pretty easily broken, unfortunately. And there's no bulk packing. Similar way the Volcano canisters are in the giant honeycombs, and you can move them all at once. There wasn't something for the SAVO base plates. And then having MTT support as well, having some subject matter experts come out and show us how we can best leverage this asset to achieve that combined arms effect. And then I'll pass it back over to Colonel Stalker.
All right. I know the last slide is probably an arrogant title there. What does a regiment need to focus on? I'll kind of maybe reshape that. What should we consider after our experiences, at least at a battalion level, whether it's training or TTP development? And I'll kind of start that with a question. And the question is, if we had a absolute certainty that we would be at war, let's say next April or May 2023, low tide season in Taiwan, what would we be doing right now, either to change the way we fight or change the way we think about things to fight? And there's two things we came up with. The first one was maybe a better study of the modern warfare. I think a majority of us tend to be backward focused, especially because we're doctrinal focused, and that tends to lean backwards more than it does forward. But if you look at the fall of 2020, the second Nagorno-Karabakh war, it's the first war fought and won with primarily robotics. 44 days, Azerbaijan takes down a major armor force, Armenia, and they do it with relative ease. And they not only do it, but they showcase how they do it, which robotics, UAS, and loitering munitions, and the use of kill chains and kill webs to great effect. And you look at the modern day Ukrainian-Russian war, which is approaching 6 months, it further highlights that we're going to be fighting in a naked battlefield. And that's much different than how we fight in NTC. I think we get tastes of modern warfare in there, whether it's a drone swarm or whether we get constant feedback that we're being watched. But I don't think we've been in an operating environment where we're continually watched across multiple forms of contact. And I think that we should be asking ourselves, how if we make the assumption that we will fight a heavy robotic UAS war and we're going to be constantly observed, how does this affect EADEV? How does it affect terrain shaping? How will modern equipment affect initiation systems associated with some of the terrain shaping capabilities we have in our arsenal? What needs to change now? Or do we just wait till we're punched in the face before we react to that? The next question would be applying lessons learned to terrain shaping. And I don't know if there's an opportunity to look at inclusion to EADEF, but we should probably be talking a lot more about the use of deception obstacles, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity if you assume we will be constantly observed, that the use of deception and how our ability to deceive the enemy, not only engineers, but maneuver forces of what they see. I think there's tremendous opportunity there. When you look at us being observed, thermal, electric, acoustic, or optical, tremendous opportunity. And the flip side of that would be, how are we masking ourselves to protect against those naked battlefield or vulnerabilities? And we don't even have a masking definition, from my understanding, in our doctrinal template right now. And I think by us talking about this and maybe challenge some of the modern doctrine and TTPs and developing those early and testing those out of NTC will be beneficial, especially in the striker formation. But I also think it's incredibly important if we want to remain relevant as engineers, especially if our end state is restore our ability to have a combined arms fight, not only in the defense, but in the offense. With that being said, that ends our presentation. We'll kind of open up to questions.
I think one of the first questions that came in from the chat was, did the BCT staff and maneuver units understand engagement area and development and their role in it? And I think that kind of goes across the spectrum of speakers you've already had here tonight. So each of them will probably have a different perspective.
Yeah, good point, and we'll make sure we'll share it. I'll kind of lead off with my initial thoughts. I think the BCT staff, the maneuver units, I think they fully understand engagement area development. I saw it happen at the brigade level. I saw it happen at individual task levels. They're actually extremely well versed and probably dedicated as much time as we did to understand the doctrine, doctrinal examples and use of it prior to NTC. They spent an immense amount of time analyzing the terrain, probably a better degree than we did, because they, especially the three maneuver commanders and the brigade commander, had fought in striker formations before. So they knew the equipment, and they really defined at the battalion and brigade level where they wanted to kill the enemy. I think, and I'll kind of reword it. I think they appreciated engagement area development as you go through the LISCO environment, because they saw that, hey, we collectively underestimate planning and resourcing, and are both time to plan effectively and the resources that actually be brought to bear. And a great example is, everyone knows the brigade lays down brigade directed obstacles, and each task force builds their engagement areas off of that. But their ability to communicate backward or upward to the brigade and backward, and understand which resources are being shifted to meet the brigade commander's intent, that I felt was they didn't clearly understand that, but I also felt that was our roles. We did a great job of having company commanders serve as task force engineers, but especially in the brigade defense, I deployed my S3 and my TAC with the main effort. They were over there, so they were in concert and in tow with that. And then I moved from task force to task force, especially when it came to resource reallocation. So I could have a discussion with the maneuver commander about why the resources were needed there, why the brigade commander needed this to achieve the overall effect and desired end state. And I hope that answered that question. I guess I'll open up to anybody in the panel if you guys have anything you want to add to that.
I'll jump on it, sir. So BCT. Yeah, so I think from the maneuver perspective, I think that they definitely understand the steps behind engagement area development. I think that we did a pretty good job before going to NTC. So a lot of times we're very offensively focused in our home station training, and the counterability or the area defense miss for the maneuver guys tends to be something that's not prioritized as much. So just doing something simple like an engagement area development too, or at least getting the maneuver staff as well as the commanders and all them out to a site to analyze terrain together, engineer, fires, the maneuver all in one spot, so we can truly get after the combined arms piece of it and have that dialogue before going out to NTC. I think a lot of times you're going to struggle with this, especially in a CTC type environment, is the collaboration that needs to occur ahead of time before going into the defense. So if that parallel planning isn't there going into it, the maneuver may be trying to figure out where they're trying to place their their weapon systems, and the engineers are trying to get out there and start to put tactical obstacles in to start trying to achieve an effect. And if that combined arm piece doesn't marry up, then obviously you got an obstacle that's out there unprotected and doesn't really meet the intent. So I think a lot of it is planning early, and so making sure that we all understand it back in home station, and then having that parallel planning and those touch points with maneuver commanders, the fires guys, well in advance of potentially reaching a culmination point.
Yeah, my experience was vastly positive with my supported maneuver task force. So I said it several times during my slides that early integration is key. And the reason is that everyone has their own kind of nuances and SOPs and how they would do something like MDMP. And so they have the same thing with EA Dev. Not that anyone is doing something wrong. It's just that when you develop SOPs separately, they can conflict. So us having the chance to get out, and we went to Yakima Training Center with 2-3 Infantry, set up SAVO and did that too with them, and showed them exactly what it does and how they can leverage it. And that made us more prepared for NTC. For the actual use of EA Dev though, the maneuver task force, rightly so, they're more worried about what they can actually impact with direct fires and indirect fires, less so than the perfect placement of obstacles. So we actually sacrificed the 2/3 max effective range of a javelin. We were a little inside of that, unfortunately, just to make sure that our obstacles were tied in appropriately, while balancing the ability for the maneuver forces to survive the engagements as well. But overall, extremely positive experience, and the maneuver commanders do know absolutely what they're doing. Colonel.
Okay, I've got another question from the chat. How much time did you spend with the maneuver company commanders and platoon leaders and understanding SAVO, good and bad?
I'll jump on that one first, if that's okay, sir.
Yep, go for it.
Yep. So we had a 3-week train up in Yakima Training Center before we did our NTC rotation. So that was around October timeframe. Unfortunately, leading into that, we hadn't had much chance to link in with our maneuver commanders. But when you're trapped in Yakima Training Center together for 3 straight weeks, you get opportunities to share your experience with people. So overall, I'd say the company commanders and platoon leaders of the maneuver units, they probably had about a good 2 or 3 days of experience with seeing SAVO and going through a Plan X with us before NTC. And then it was really just up to me and the platoon leaders to get into the talk during their planning sessions at NTC to make sure that they were thinking with our capability in mind, not just from the fires and the direct fires aspect. But largely extremely good.
Yeah, and I'd add on to that the human dimension aspect of it, because relationships don't get built over a 3-week Yakima training rotation. The fact that the company commanders were already integrated in those training meetings with the task force and also did PT with them, that was probably the larger catalyst to healthy relationship. So the fact that they already knew the company commander and platoon leaders before they went out to Yakima and started training on SAVO accelerated their ability to chain teach it down. I will say in this brigade, I was blessed to have sergeant majors, a brigade commander, and maneuver commanders that invested in their defense. I don't think there wasn't any defense that there wasn't a company worth of infantrymen out there assisting, whether it was SAVO emplacement, frat face and placement, or triple strand concertina. Usually you get thrown like 20 soldiers, but to see sergeant majors pony up an entire company worth of soldiers aided us greatly, and also told us how much they valued their defense. Over.
Yes, sir. One thing I'd like to add to that as well is kind of technical what Captain Schultz has said is that we did see from like our perspective, we spent a lot of time when we were at JBLM before we went to NTC, we spent a lot of time prepping for like a breach, all the, the cool guy stuff and coordinating a breach and how to, increase that speed to get the maneuver element through the opening. So that was something I think in hindsight, we probably should have spent more time kind of going over the defense and so that they could understand SAVO. And even to tackle on that first question, I even had a couple of the S3 captains came up to me and were talking about obstacle emplacement. And I think what gets lost a little bit in translation is what Major Laux talked about is that art. So they just thought that all obstacles were going in a straight line. You just put an obstacle down. They didn't understand the actual effects you can tie into terrain and how disrupt versus block versus turn, how all those kind of feed into each other. And when you use that to your advantage versus just using a block on every single obstacle to stop the enemy.
I think just to close that question out, and I think, so maneuver commanders are accustomed to receiving enablers of all kinds of varieties to achieve whatever that mission requirement is. So just from the enablers perspective, I mean, we went in with by platoon, what the capabilities that they're going to be receiving. So a capabilities type brief. And that was briefed to the maneuver commanders as enablers were being retask organized throughout transitions down in NTC. So I think through some of those products, you can get the maneuver commanders to understand at least the capabilities and some of the nuances associated with it. It's a good TTP for enablers just to have anytime that they're supporting whatever that command support relationship is.
Okay. Another question. What coordination did you make with the logisticians so they understand the SAVO packages and resupply?
So,
Yeah, I'll start with that question. Not enough. It's never enough. I probably have a jaded. I trust no one but myself when it comes to supply chain management, when it comes to CCLs. So we did a good job of carrying as a BEB, and especially with the SAVO, carrying that on hand. And then that came at some trade-offs about what we couldn't do. And having discussions with the brigade commander about, hey, where we could offset certain aspects of it, that worked out fairly well. So if you look at our flat racks that we had allocated in our haul capacity, probably 70% of our haul capacity was dedicated to obstacle effort and placement. And what we did is we carried the CCL so task forces didn't have to, and that allowed the companies to carry SAVO. So I think you heard Lieutenant Johnson talk earlier about having that stuff on hand so they can immediately start. That provided to be valuable for immediate implementation and allowed us to pull the CCLs to allow other obstacle effort to be in place, but to allow immediate impact with the SAVO. So I would say we used our synchronization events and probably more commanders dialogue to solve the rest of the sustainment trail. I know we had a throughput supply action that occurred with the CSSB in our rotation, which is always a hit or miss based on how early you coordinate and how much you nano manage those logistics or CCLs being pushed forward. And we had great success. So some of it's through commanders dialogue and relationships, keeping it on the brigade commander's forefront and letting him know that defense, both his brigade defense and also the task force's defense heavily depended on CCL's help. What we had to manage ourselves and that we took the burden on, and we did, I thought, a good job with my FSC and with the companies, is we would push the CCLs directly to them at a known point and established engineer supply points, whether it was a large engineer supply point to distribute or an LRP, that we would drop those CCLs and they pull, or sometimes we just take them directly out to it. And especially as you got tired, you saw a heavier leader involvement. So I saw company commanders assisting in getting CCLs out there, and sometimes being the convoy leader themselves to ensure it got out there. So I guess I'll open that to anybody else who wants to.
yes, sir. So I won't talk to the SAVO piece specifically, but just CCL in general. One of the things that we learned was the codifying what the flat rack layout is going to be in your SOPs. So I think we defined what our various CCLs were for triple strand, for Volcano, different types of obstacle effects that you put in, but we didn't necessarily put into our tax op how that should be laid out on the back of a flat rack. And the end result is, I think we had some pickets that ended up falling off some of our wire CCL packages that limited. So we were no longer 300 meters of triple strand when that wire arrived, because some of that stuff ended up falling off flat racks. So just thinking through how you're going to actually put that stuff onto your racks so that all arrives on time. But I don't think,
Yeah, and that it comes off, and you know, we learned a lot about a combat configured load versus just a load. To Brad's point, we didn't really configure it with the intent of how you take it off, so it can be placed quickly. So that was just to add that a large lesson that we took away, and we were able to capitalize on towards the later battle periods in the rotation.
Last thing I want to reinforce with that one, my mindset's very much the same as Colonel Stalker's, in that, especially in a LISCO environment, you can't rely solely on supply chains, being able to have everything that you need brought to the FLOT. So the way I rate my platoon and my forces was to have that flexibility with us. And that way, at least we had something on hand where we could get started. And you really can't choose when the enemy is going to commit a counterattack or when they're going to influence your decisive operation. So having that on hand already and distributed is critical to achieve that combined arms effect.
I think we got time probably for one more question. What would you tell industry about an improvement either to the state SAVO or the initiating systems and their limitations or potential for using with SAVO?
I can jump on that one first. So something we noticed, I know SAVO is it's an interim solution. I'm not briefed up on what the next step is past SAVO, but assuming we were going to go to war tomorrow and SAVO was the product that we're bringing forward, I'd like to see like a Claymore would come with wire prepackaged. I'd like to see that come with the SAVO base plates as part of the class 5 issue. Coming on a reel of say 100 feet would save us from having to have additional reels of comma wire that we would normally have, or we found ourselves borrowing from our S6 quite a lot to make sure that we were able to meet that. And then the reuse of that is tempting, which you wouldn't want in large scale ground combat operations, reusing and then having a fault in that wire. So having it prepackaged, having it come with that, I think would be very beneficial.
You guys got any?
I just think the weight is very heavy. That's pretty much all I got. It sucks to be the guy on the ground actually carrying that. So.
Yep, and this is Colonel Stalker. For me, I'd look at initiating systems. I'd say, are we thinking EW hardening associated with the initiating systems? I think having a command detonation system is great, but some of the other alternatives are wonderful, but can they survive modern warfare? And especially what's brought to market with jamming capability of a peer competitor on the battlefield. And the other aspect would be masking. How do we make, what can we add to the SAVO template that looks like a SAVO, but it's not a SAVO? Maybe it takes, it has the same electronic signature, same thermal signature, optical look and lay, but is 1/2 the weight, maybe a limited effect, but still has the overall intent to deter. Because from a visual optic scenario being viewed, it looks like a SAVO minefield. So I think there's potential there, probably low cost potential, whether that's a ground up solution created by the engineer regiment or one that industry creates.
No, I do appreciate the fact that there are 3 different initiation systems that we can use. Colonel Stalker already talked about the spider and the susceptibility to jamming for that. I think the other thing that the spider allows us to maximize or get our sappers back at that 2/3, the max effective range, further away from the obstacle versus using command wire. But the spider, for anybody that's trained on the spider, that's a commitment to your engineer qualification table build up in order to maintain that proficiency. So I think there's a trade-off all around when we're looking at the different initiation systems, with whether that's providing us a standoff and the amount of time that you're gonna have to devote to get your squads trained, your S6s trained to get the frequencies and everything that's associated with the spider.
Well, I know General Watson has joined us throughout here, so I didn't know see if he wanted to come up on with closing comments.
Yeah, so first of all, to Dave Stalker and the entire team, you have set the standard for what right looks like in terms of sharing information, getting it across the regiment. So my personal thanks for your passion and for the way that you've taken on this mission, the way you've stepped into the breach to your entire team. Well done. And for those that are logged on, we're going to continue to do these series of engineer rally points where this is all about junior leaders talking about their experiences with other junior leaders down at the tactical level. And so we're going to take a small departure of that, but I think it's a topic of extreme interest. We've got a major engineering firm that's going to come sometime in November. We're looking at the third week of November before the Thanksgiving Day break. And they're going to talk about, for our captains, for our sergeants first class, what are they looking for in a leader? Because, the reality is not all of us will stay in the Army. And I think we need to be better prepared. I think this is taking care of the regiment. So stay tuned. Come up on the AEA website. Look for that registration. And if you can, do me a favor and get the word out about the engineer rally point. We'll do it every 2 months. I think this has been a great initiative, and teams like the 23rd BEB making it happen just makes this just an incredible event. So Dave, thanks for all your hard work on this, and I really do appreciate it. Nothing further.